Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your sources, articles, and notes and distill them into the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight. Today, we're plunging into a concept that might sound ancient, something pulled from, dusty philosophy texts, but as our stack of sources reveals, it is profoundly, surprisingly relevant to our modern lives. We're talking about the enduring idea of virtue.
That's right. We're going to unpack what virtue truly means, how it has been understood across civilizations and millennia, and how it connects to pretty much everything, from your personal happiness and emotional well-being to effective leadership and even the very structure of our economies.
Yeah, it touches on so much.
Get ready for some genuine aha moments, because this deep dive is designed to offer you a shortcut, really, to being well-informed about a timeless human quest. As we'll discover, these aren't just ancient ideals, but maybe humanity's universal correctives tools honed over millennia to help us overcome the deepest, most persistent challenges within ourselves and, well, in our societies too.
Our mission today is to explore a stack of fascinating material. We've got Stoic philosophy, Aristotelian ethics, cross-cultural studies, modern psychological perspectives. Basically, we're trying to understand why cultivating good character isn't just some moral ideal. There may be a deeply practical pathway to a more fulfilling and impactful life.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's unpack this concept of virtue. It might sound a bit old-fashioned, right? Perhaps even a little intimidating, like something only a sage on a mountaintop could achieve. But our sources show it's incredibly foundational and maybe far more approachable than we might initially think. What does ancient philosophy, particularly Stoicism, tell us virtue really means at its core?
That's a great place to start. At its heart in Stoicism, virtue isn't merely a collection of good traits like, being honest or kind. It's described as something much deeper. It's a more fundamental form of expertise or skill.
Expertise, like learning an instrument.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. More specifically, it's the knowledge of how to live well in every way. Think of it as maybe a comprehensive operating system for human excellence. This isn't just about isolated good deeds or checking off a list of actions. It's a profound form of understanding, and it's meant to shape your entire personality, your decision-making process, your complete life, really. It's a holistic approach to being human where your entire being is sort of aligned with doing what is right and good.
So it's not just what you do, but how you are, like down to your very core.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the Stoics truly distilled this comprehensive knowledge into what they called the four cardinal virtues. These weren't arbitrary choices. They were meticulously chosen because they were seen as ways of mapping the main, most crucial areas of human experience and expertise. By mastering these, you essentially master what it means to lead a full human life.
Okay, so what are they?
Right. First, there's wisdom. This is the foundational understanding. It's knowing how to act and feel correctly in any given situation. It's about making sound judgments, discerning what is truly good, bad, or just indifferent. It guides all other virtues, like a master conductor guiding an orchestra.
Okay, the foundation.
Then we have courage. This is knowing how to act and feel correctly, particularly in situations of danger or when facing things that are typically seen as fearful, like death, loss, or other significant disasters. It's fortitude, resilience, bravery in the face of adversity, whether that's physical or emotional. It's not about being fearless, mind you, but about having the right response to fear.
Managing fear, not eliminating it.
Precisely. Third, self-control, often called moderation. This is the skill of knowing how to act and feel well in situations that typically arouse strong emotions like desire, appetite, or lust. It's about managing those internal impulses and passions, making sure they don't lead you astray from what is good and rational. Imagine it as like an internal thermostat, keeping your desires in balance.
Got it. Control from within.
And finally, justice. This is the knowledge of how to act and feel well in our relationships with other people. It spans everything from individual interactions and family dynamics to broader communal responsibilities. This virtue specifically includes acting generously with positive benevolence, fostering genuine friendship, and showing affection. It's about fulfilling your role, your duties within the human community.
That's fascinating that these aren't just separate good qualities, but are deeply interconnected. It sounds like if you develop one, you're almost compelled to develop the others.
Absolutely. Spot on. It's critical to understand that these virtues are not practiced in isolation. The Stoics saw them either as different facets of a single, unified form of knowledge or as deeply interdependent. You can't really separate them neatly. The correct exercise of any one virtue really relies on possessing and exercising the others too.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Take courage again. True courage isn't just raw bravery. It requires wisdom to discern what is truly dangerous and what is not worth fearing. And it needs justice to know when courage should be applied for the benefit of others, not just for reckless self-interest. They form a coherent, integrated system for living, each one reinforcing and enabling the others. You can't truly have one without having aspects of the others.
When you describe virtue as knowledge or expertise, it can sound maybe a little intellectual, perhaps even a bit cold. We often associate emotions with virtue, compassion, empathy, things like that. But our sources suggest it goes much deeper than just rationality. How does Stoicism view the connection between virtue and our emotional life?
That's a crucial point, and it's where Stoicism often gets a bad rap, People think it's about suppressing emotions. It might sound purely intellectual, but the Stoic view of virtue as knowledge is far from narrowly rational or cognitive. It's absolutely crucial for Stoicism that these forms of knowledge profoundly shape the entire personality, and that absolutely includes our emotions and desires.
So how does that work?
Well, it reflects their view of human psychology as unified and holistic. For them, our beliefs and our reasoning directly determine how we feel and what we desire. It's not about suppressing emotions. It's about transforming them at their root by cultivating sound judgment.
Transforming them. Okay.
So developing virtue, therefore, leads to a radical change in our emotional landscape. We stop feeling what they considered misguided or bad emotions, what they called the passions. Things like anger, fear, or intense craving, because these are based on false ethical judgments and cause disturbing physical and psychological effects. Think of these passions as like destructive, uncontrolled reactions.
Okay, so you replace those bad emotions.
Exactly. Instead, as we cultivate virtue, we come to feel only good emotions, which are based on sound ethical judgments and are typically calmer, more rational experiences. Examples include wishing, which is a reasoned desire rather than an intense, uncontrolled craving, caution, a reasoned assessment of risk rather than paralyzing fear, and joy, a calm and stable happiness that isn't dependent on fleeting external circumstances. Towards other people, it fosters genuine goodwill and affection, not just a fleeting sentiment. So virtues, as forms of knowledge, reshape the whole personality at the emotional level, leading to a much more stable and fulfilling inner life. It's about emotional intelligence rooted in profound understanding.
So virtue isn't just about what you do, it's about fundamentally reshaping who you are, even your emotions. That's a powerful idea. But it raises a huge question, doesn't it? Is this deep transformation something reserved for a select few, for philosophers and emperors, or is it genuinely within reach for all of us?
You're hitting on a core Stoic belief, and it's a surprisingly inclusive and optimistic one. They believed all human beings as such are capable of developing virtue.
All human beings. Really?
Yes. This development, they argued, does not depend on possessing special inborn capacities or a specific social background or even a particular intellectual education, as some other ancient philosophies supposed. Instead, they believe that all human beings have the starting points of virtue, like seeds already planted within us.
What makes them so sure?
Well, what supports this universal claim for them? Partly, the Stoics thought all human beings possess an inbuilt capacity to form ethical notions, like good, and to give these notions content, regardless of their social context. We inherently understand concepts of right and wrong, even if our specific cultural interpretations differ. But most importantly, Stoics emphasize the key role of development in ethical understanding. No one acquires virtues instantly. It is the outcome of a process of development, in most cases a lifelong process, and one that may never be wholly complete. It's a journey, not a static state. And it's open to everyone who commits to it, regardless of their starting point.
A lifelong journey.
And this journey of development is conceived as having two interconnected strands. First, there's progress in understanding. This involves continuously deepening one's grasp of what it means to have the virtues and how to exercise them in real-life situations. It's about refining your ethical perception and judgment, always learning.
Okay, understanding more.
And second, there's progress in interpersonal and social relationships. This leads us to recognize all human beings as our brothers and sisters, as fellow ethical agents within a shared cosmos. The journey toward virtue is thus also a journey towards greater connection and responsibility within the human community, expanding our circle of concern and natural affection.
So it's a continuous journey, a process of growth, and one that we all have the inherent capacity to embark on. But if it's such an arduous journey demanding lifelong effort, why bother? What's the ultimate payoff, especially in terms of happiness?
This brings us to a distinctive and often misunderstood feature of Stoic thinking. Their belief that having and exercising the virtues constitutes by itself the best form of human life. In other words, it confers happiness or eudaimonia.
It is happiness, not just leads to it.
Exactly. This isn't just a side effect. For the Stoics, virtue is happiness. They had this radical idea. Virtue isn't just part of happiness, it is happiness. They'd say virtue is necessary and sufficient for happiness. Think of it this way. It's not just one ingredient in the recipe, it's the entire recipe itself. You can't be truly happy without it, and with it, you don't need anything else.
So it's not just a means to an end, but the end itself. That's quite a bold claim, isn't it? Especially in a world that so often links happiness to external factors like wealth or health.
Absolutely, it's a radical departure. Happiness for Stoics is conceived in objective terms. It is a specific kind of life, the natural life for human beings to lead, a life lived in harmony with reason and nature. However, it's also seen as providing certain positive subjective experiences, which align with how we tend to conceive happiness today. These include the good emotions, like joy we talked about, a calm and stable inner contentment that arises from living virtuously. The Stoic view is often summarized as virtue is the only good, or in philosophical terms, that virtue is necessary and sufficient for happiness. This means for them, all you truly need to be happy is virtue. Nothing else is strictly required for true happiness.
How does that compare to other ancient views, like Aristotle's?
Good question. It contrasts sharply with views held by some followers of Plato and Aristotle, who believed happiness depended on a combination of virtue and external goods, things like bodily health, material prosperity, or the well-being of one's family. While Stoics recognized that external goods have, they called them preferred indifference, they maintained that virtue had a substantively different kind or level of value, a value sufficient on its own to confer complete human happiness. It's not that externals are bad, but they are indifferent to true happiness, which comes solely from your internal character.
Why take such an extreme stance? It seems counterintuitive.
Well, why did the Stoics hold such an apparently extreme view? A key support for their perspective is the belief that virtue alone provides a reliable and consistent basis for leading the best human life, for achieving happiness. None of the external goods taken on their own do so. They are transient and unreliable. They can be lost at any moment. You can lose your wealth, your health, even your loved ones. And if your happiness is tied to them, it would be equally precarious. In this sense, virtue possesses a value of a profoundly different kind from external goods. That's why Stoics reject the idea that virtue plus external goods makes for a better or happier life than virtue alone. It's an internal, unconquerable fortress of well-being.
That makes sense. If your happiness depends on things you can lose, it's not truly secure. But this also brings to mind that famous Stoic ideal, the sage happy on the rack of torture. That sounds incredibly difficult, almost impossible for most of us.
It does, and it's important to clarify that. The ideal of the wise person, the Stoic sage, being happy on the rack of torture is an ideal aspiration, right? It's not an everyday occurrence or an expectation for everyone. It represents the target or limit of human aspiration, a philosophical benchmark for ultimate resilience and inner freedom. It's the theoretical pinnacle of what consistent virtuous practice could achieve. The source argues that this Stoic view that virtue is the only reliable and consistent basis for happiness is highly defensible, even if it sets a challenging bar. It's about striving for inner peace regardless of external circumstances.
Okay, so we've established virtue's universal potential and its deep connection to happiness. But theory is one thing, practice is another. How did someone like Marcus Aurelius actually live these Stoic ideals? And what can we learn from his real-world application, given he was, arguably one of the most powerful men in the world?
That's exactly right. Marcus Aurelius offers us an incredible window into that practical application. His Meditations is essentially a private philosophical diary prepared for his own guidance. It wasn't intended for publication, which gives it this raw, honest quality. It's his internal dialogue, his philosophical wrestling match with himself. The passages chosen by our source clearly illustrate the themes we've discussed and show how Stoic ideas provided a robust ethical framework for life in antiquity, which, remarkably, we can still draw upon today, even if our daily struggles aren't quite imperial ones.
So what does he say about virtue being the only good?
Well, one powerful passage, Meditations 3.6, very clearly conveys the idea that virtues like justice, truthfulness, and self-control are the only true good and the proper object of human aspiration. Marcus urges himself essentially that if you find anything better, turn to it with all your heart. But he cautions, if everything else seems trivial and valueless compared to virtue, things like praise, power, wealth, or pleasure, then give no room to anything else. To turn away from virtue, he notes, means inner conflict. And it's not right to set up anything alien to virtue as a rival to the rational and social good. It's his fundamental principle. This is what truly matters. Everything else is secondary. He's constantly reminding himself to prioritize his internal character above all external gains.
That's a powerful grounding for decision-making.
Yeah.
So how did he translate that into the daily grind of being an emperor? That must have been incredibly complex.
Precisely. Meditations 3.11 demonstrates how the idea of virtue as the only good can form the basis of a practical strategy for decision-making in specific situations. Marcus advises himself to methodically and truthfully examine everything in life, considering its function in the universe and its value for humanity. And crucially, he asks himself, what virtue is needed to respond to it? Such as gentleness, courage, truthfulness, good faith, simplicity, self-sufficiency, and so on. He's essentially creating a checklist for ethical response in the moment.
Like a practical tool.
Exactly. This also connects to the Stoic idea of viewing all human beings as fellow citizens in a universal community, meaning ethical decision-making should always include this social dimension. For example, when faced with a difficult imperial decision, he wouldn't just ask what's expedient, but what virtue is demanded here? Justice for my people, courage in adversity, or self-control over my own frustrations. It's a very practical, almost algorithmic approach to ethical living.
And how did this connect to his own happiness?
In Meditations 2.5, Marcus highlights the profound link between virtue and happiness. He urges himself to carry out his specific role in life as a Roman, a man, and an emperor with, quote, scrupulous and unaffected dignity and affectionate concern for others, and freedom and justice. To act this way means giving single-minded focus to virtuous action, doing each act as if it were the last of your life, freed from randomness or self-love. To act this way is to achieve happiness, leading the best human life. The gods will ask no more, he writes. This also produces a smoothly flowing life, which is one of the Stoic definitions of happiness, eudaimonia. It's about finding inner peace by doing your duty with excellence and integrity, whatever your role might be.
That's powerful. And the sources mention his thoughts on death, too.
Yes, the source also provides 3 short, poignant passages where Marcus encourages himself to anticipate his own death with calmness, confidence, and acceptance. This response is justified partly because death is a natural organic process, something to be accepted, like birth, just part of the grand cosmic order. But crucially, Marcus can face death this way because he has tried to use his life as a way of expressing the virtues. The knowledge of oncoming death shouldn't stop him from continuing to do so until the very end. He's basically saying, I've lived virtuously as best I could, so death is simply the natural conclusion to a life well lived.
Wow.
These passages also powerfully illustrate how ethical development, by practicing virtues, shifts emotional responses from the misguided fear of death to the good emotion of acceptance, or even a kind of calm joy. Thus, virtue yields happiness subjectively in terms of feelings and emotions, as well as objectively in constituting the best human life. It's a remarkable testament to the transformative power of these ideas, right there in his private thoughts.
It's clear how Stoicism was deeply helpful to Marcus, providing an anchor in an incredibly turbulent life. So what about us today? How can these ancient ideas translate to our modern lives, especially given the complexities and different moral frameworks we operate within? The imperial battles of Rome might seem a world away from our daily commutes or office politics.
You're right, the context is different, but the human condition, with its challenges and desires, remains remarkably consistent, doesn't it? In principle, Stoicism can help us in exactly the same way it helped Marcus, by providing an ethical framework for living and setting out aspirational goals that can shape our entire lives. This is precisely why Marcus's meditations are used extensively in modern programs like Stoic Week or daily Stoic practices. People are seeking practical guidance for modern challenges like stress, uncertainty, and navigating complex social interactions.
How does it compare to how we usually think about morality today?
Well, when we compare this with modern moral thinking, we often operate with a contrast between selfish or egoistic motivations and other benefiting or altruistic motivations. Altruism is frequently defined by doing your duty or performing right actions, or maybe aiming for maximal benefit, the greatest happiness for the greatest number. The modern challenge is usually seen as promoting altruism and counteracting selfishness.
Right, that sounds familiar.
Stoic ideas about virtue and ancient Greek and Roman ideas generally really cut across this egoism-altruism distinction. The virtues relate to what we are in ourselves and in relation to others alike. It's not about choosing between self and others. It's about perfecting yourself in relation to the world. The Stoic challenge instead is achieving expertise, consistently developing and exercising the knowledge that makes up the virtues, and forming a correct understanding of what they truly constitute.
So it's less about a moral tug-of-war between self and others, and more about achieving a comprehensive inner excellence that naturally benefits both.
Exactly, you've got it. And this ancient framework offers several distinct advantages for us today. First, it makes motivation central to ethics. It's difficult to urge people to perform right actions unless they are motivated to do so, right? The Stoic framework shows how acting virtuously can be part of the kind of life that constitutes happiness, providing an inherent, deeply personal drive to do good because it benefits you most profoundly.
That makes sense. What else?
Second, it emphasizes development. It stresses the central role of ethical development as a lifelong process, not just something part of growing up into adulthood. That's incredibly relevant in a world where we're constantly learning and adapting. Third, while modern thinking often focuses solely on the other benefiting dimension, Stoic frameworks see virtues as covering both self-related and other-related sides of human experience. It grounds ethical life in what we are fundamentally, not just what we do for others, recognizing that self-care and self-mastery are crucial for effective engagement with the world. Finally, it highlights that acting well depends on knowledge or expertise, on developing a profound ethical understanding that shapes the entire personality. This is a dimension whose importance is not always recognized in modern accounts, which can sometimes focus purely on external behavior rather than internal transformation.
The profound applicability of these ancient ideas is clear. However, engaging with such deep philosophy inevitably raises questions and paradoxes, some of which our sources directly grapple with. And one in particular strikes at the very heart of human nature. That was a fantastic exploration of Stoicism's practical wisdom, but like any robust philosophy, it faces challenges and apparent contradictions. One of our commenters, Roger Blankman, raises a truly fundamental paradox about human nature itself when considering Stoicism's core tenets.
Right. Blankman points out that Stoics insist right living means living according to nature and reason, which leads to virtue. However, if we observe that most people don't live virtuously, they mistake externals for what's important, focusing on wealth, fame, pleasure, and this behavior is ubiquitous, then isn't that also part of human nature?
Yeah, that's the tricky part.
The paradox then is, how can Stoics say that what is natural is to act against this observed, widespread human behavior? It seems to imply that acting against nature is acting according to nature. It's a genuine head-scratcher.
It sounds like a nature versus nurture debate, but seen through an ancient lens. How do the sources help us untangle that?
Our source offers a few insightful ways to understand this apparent contradiction. One response is that for the Stoics, nurture is within nature. They didn't operate with our modern nature versus nurture split. Unlike our modern debate, is it genetics or upbringing? The Stoics saw it all as integrated. How we are raised, our social relations, and our capacities for moral choice or assent are all part of our nature. Externals are simply things outside our capacity for moral choice, but our capacity to relate to them is internal. So living virtuously isn't acting against human nature, it's realizing its fullest potential.
Okay, so it's about potential versus common practice.
Exactly. Another perspective is that acting in accordance with nature means to think, to use our unique human capacity for conceptual thought and reason before acting. When we act on impulse, like animals, we neglect our distinctly human capacity for rational thought and consideration of consequences. So our true nature as humans is to live and think about the right actions to take, to engage our unique rational faculties. It's about being truly human, not just an advanced animal.
And they weren't expecting perfection, right?
Right. And importantly, the Stoics were realistic. They recognized that people aren't perfect and that very few people achieve the ideal of the sage. They focused on making progress, or prokope. They weren't issuing dictates or expecting immediate perfection, but offering advice for a lifelong journey of ethical understanding and self-improvement, acknowledging that it's up to you to accept and apply it. They knew that consistent virtuous action was a rare achievement, but the striving itself was the point, the direction of travel.
That helps clarify the nature paradox, showing how Stoics distinguish true human nature, our rational capacity, from common human behavior, which often falls short. But Blankman also poses another profound challenge, one that's a direct ethical dilemma for us: the Marcus predicament. How do we reconcile the compassionate Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius, author of Meditations, with the Roman emperor who conducted bloody warfare and allowed the persecution of Christians? This is a stark contrast between ideal and reality.
This is a particularly challenging question highlighted by the source, and one that resonates powerfully today when we look at leaders, doesn't it? Blankman notes that he searched for Marcus's own reconciliation in his private writings, but found none. Given Marcus's sincerity, his honest self-criticism in the Meditations, his lifelong interest in a basically benign philosophy, and his obvious intelligence, it seems unlikely he didn't consider the conflict between his ideals and his imperial duties.
Why didn't he write about it?
Well, the absence of his direct discussion leads Blankman to suspect that Marcus himself may have failed to resolve it, or perhaps simply didn't feel it was appropriate to write about such complex public affairs in a private diary meant for self-guidance. Our source leaves this question open, providing no definitive answer from Marcus or other ancient sources. This highlights a crucial point for us: the inherent difficulty in translating profound philosophical ideals into the often brutal and compromising realities of power and political leadership. Even an emperor committed to virtue faced agonizing dilemmas. He might have rationalized warfare as a necessary evil for the stability of the empire, which he saw as his duty, or persecution as maintaining public order. But the internal conflict, even if unwritten, must have been immense. It serves as a stark reminder that the path of virtue is not without its agonizing dilemmas, especially when one holds immense power and responsibility.
So the sources don't give us a clear answer, which is unsatisfying but honest. But it does make you wonder, doesn't it, if even the most dedicated philosopher kings ultimately face dilemmas where ideals clash brutally with reality, and there are no perfectly virtuous answers. These challenges lead us to another crucial modern application. How do virtues fit into something as pervasive as our economic systems, particularly capitalism, and the broader world of leadership today? We've seen how virtues shaped ancient thought and individual lives. But can they really inform something as vast and complex as our global economy? One of our sources touches on how ancient wisdom might intersect with modern capitalism. The critique of capitalism often involves its perceived encouragement of greed, which seems like a distinct vice.
Indeed. At a philosophy talk event mentioned in the sources, an audience member contended that capitalism, which often seems to commend greed, an apparent vice, paradoxically generates pleasure and happiness by creating wealth and consumer choices. However, as the expert Ken notes in the source, this kind of economy dangerously requires constant growth, which often comes at a significant cost, not just economic, but social and environmental. The pursuit of infinite growth on a finite planet inherently creates tensions with principles like moderation and justice.
But it has lifted people out of poverty too, right?
Absolutely. Another expert, Melissa, added that while capitalism has demonstrably raised many out of poverty and fueled technological advancement, leading to remarkable progress, it has also produced significant negative consequences. We've seen rampant unemployment, cycles of financial hardship, and severe ecological crises. These unintended side effects clearly demonstrate that an economic system, one untethered from ethical considerations, can produce widespread harm alongside its benefits. The critical conclusion offered is that ancient virtues should re-enlighten capitalism rather than simply replace it.
Re-enlighten. What does that mean in practice?
It suggests a call for integrating ethical principles and purpose into our economic and business practices, moving beyond a sole focus on unchecked growth or profit, aiming for a more balanced, just, and sustainable system. Think of the rise of B Corp, which balance profit with purpose, or the growing movement towards ESG, environmental, social, governance, investing. These are modern attempts, really, to infuse virtue back into economic decisions.
This idea of re-enlightening systems with virtues brings us directly to the concept of leadership. We see character failures in so many sectors today: education, business, even the military. Why is this connection between leadership and virtuous character so vital, and what can ancient wisdom teach us about it?
It's absolutely vital because leaders, by their very nature, shape the world around them, don't they? A paper titled Character and Leadership: Ancient Wisdom for the 21st Century argues that drawing from ancient philosophers like Socrates, Plato, and especially Aristotle offers timeless wisdom that is incredibly relevant to contemporary leadership. They suggest this wisdom can illuminate three key questions, starting with, why is the connection between leadership and virtuous character so important? And the answer is simple. We are inundated with failures of character and leadership across society, and these failures have real, tangible consequences.
Can you give some examples from the sources?
Sure. For instance, in education, the source mentions shocking survey results showing that 80% of high-achieving high school students admitted to cheating, with half feeling it wasn't wrong. This isn't just about grades. It raises profound questions about a failure of knowledge, emotions, environment, and how it impacts future leaders who will step into positions of trust. In the business world, we see daily critical issues involving ethical decision-making with profound and lasting consequences highlighted by high-profile cases of dishonest and fraudulent corporate practices like Enron, WorldCom, Wells Fargo, VW, GE, Fox News, Uber. The list goes on. These aren't just isolated incidents. They show systemic gaps in upholding ethical standards, tolerating unethical means, accepting gifts, showing favoritism. These are clear indicators of a widespread lack of virtue, costing billions and eroding public trust.
And the military context.
Right. And in the military, the U.S. Army War College coined the acronym VUCA. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, to describe the new normal of today's disruptive environment. Think post-9/11, the 2008 financial crisis, compounded by radical technological changes. This environment creates an even greater need for stability and direction. Good character, values, and purpose provide that internal compass, or true north. Imagine a ship without a rudder in a storm. That's leadership without core values to guide it through a VUCA world. This context also forces us to ask if character is innate or situational. While some research suggests unethical behavior can be situational, Aristotle offers insight by recognizing both the environment's importance and the individual's freedom to choose, leaving room for character as an important explanatory factor. It's not just the bad apple, it's often the barrel, but the apple can choose.
That brings us to the second question from that paper. What exactly is good leadership and good character in this context? How do the ancients define it?
Excellent point. Tracing back to the ancient Greeks, the term character comes from charasin, meaning to engrave or inscribe. This implies human qualities that have been internally engraved into an individual, forming their very essence something deeply ingrained, not superficial.
Engraved. I like that.
Yeah. For Aristotle, good character reflects the human function or purpose and arises when an individual actualizes their essential potential. Crucially, it's not automatic or given at birth, but must be socially cultivated. Purpose, in this sense, initiates the action habit, the ability to get things done effectively and consistently, aligned with one's fundamental why.
How did Aristotle differ from Socrates on this?
While Socrates famously believed that a person who knows good will subsequently do good, Aristotle, his brilliant student, held a more nuanced view. He believed that we become good, not just by knowing, but by practicing good actions. A person might have intellectual knowledge of what is good, but lack the disposition, the habit, or even the emotional control to act on that knowledge. For Aristotle, being virtuous or having good character was the ultimate pursuit of human fulfillment and reflected the excellence of a person's character, a state achieved through consistent moral effort and practical engagement with the world.
So it's about doing good second nature rather than just an intellectual exercise.
Yeah.
And Aristotle had a specific way of defining this, didn't he? The 5 features.
He did, and it's quite sophisticated. In his Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle offers a multifaceted definition of virtue, a state of character concerned with choice, lying in a mean. This mean being determined by a rational principle, and by that principle by which the man of practical wisdom would determine it. Let's break down 5 key features here. First, virtue is a hexis, a settled state of character. Imagine it like building muscle memory for doing the right thing, until it's almost second nature. It's a stable disposition, not unalterable, but providing a consistent tendency.
Okay, a settled state. What's next?
Second, a virtuous agent makes prohairesis, or choices, that are responsive to their conception of what is worth doing. The virtuous person isn't just reacting, they're making intentional, reasoned choices, reflecting deliberation and purpose. This capacity for reasoned choice is crucial for good leadership.
Choice. Got it. Then the mean.
Third, virtuous choices and actions lie in a mean, an appropriate point between 2 extremes, an excess and a deficiency. For example, courage is the mean between recklessness, too much, and cowardice, too little. Generosity is the mean between wastefulness and stinginess. It's not a mathematical average, but a just right point relative to the situation and the individual.
The Goldilocks point.
Sort of, yeah. Fourth, the virtuous agent's conception of the good is rational, arrived at by weighing different considerations relevant to what is worth pursuing. It's not just a gut feeling, but a thoughtful decision based on reason. And fifth, in making these good rational judgments, they are exercising the intellectual virtue of phronesis, or practical wisdom. This is the ability to apply abstract ethical principles to concrete situations to discern the right course of action. Aristotle notes that phronesis brings with it all the moral virtues: justice, courage, self-control, truthfulness, meaning a practically wise leader will possess the full set of virtues needed to act on their judgments. It's the master intellectual virtue that enables moral excellence.
So Aristotle gives us this robust framework for what a virtuous person looks like. But how does that square with the reality we see, where even good people struggle? We're not all sages.
That's a very practical observation, and Aristotle was keenly aware of it. He observed that actual humans are typically either encratic, meaning strong-willed, able to overcome conflicting desires to do the right thing, even if it's hard, or acratic, weak-willed, where conflicting desires overcome their choice to do good. The fully virtuous person, who effortlessly wants, chooses, and acts rightly because their desires are perfectly aligned with their reason, is an ideal, rarely, if ever, found in humans. It's a theoretical North Star. Thus, when we call someone virtuous, we often mean they are largely encratic, closer to the ideal but still subject to internal struggle. It highlights the realistic and challenging nature of virtue for us mere mortals, that it's a constant effort.
Okay, that makes it feel more achievable, or at least the struggle feels more normal. Which leads to the third question. How do we actually develop this character?
Right. How are good character and leadership acquired and developed? The Character and Leadership paper highlights the modern emphasis on authentic leadership and the vital role of purpose. Simon Sinek's widely influential work, like Start With Why, resonates here. Individuals and organizations are increasingly seeking their raison d'etre, their core why.
That start with why idea is everywhere now.
It really is. And in a VUCA world, having a clear why provides stability and grounding. It's like a sailing vessel needing its centerboard for stability and a tiller for direction. Purpose is that internal compass that keeps you on course amidst the shifting currents. Companies like Starbucks and Heineken illustrate the benefits of clear purpose in navigating challenging conditions and building strong brands. The source argues that purpose isn't something to be found, like an external treasure you dig up, but to be reconnected with. It's the one that has always been there. Your purpose, in this sense, is your unique essence, what you bring that no one else brings to any role or endeavor. It's your distinctive contribution to the world, your fundamental reason for being.
So virtues are clearly intertwined with leadership and societal well-being, providing an essential compass in a chaotic world. But this raises another fascinating question. Are these virtues universal? Or are they just culturally specific ideals, reflections of a particular time and place, like ancient Greece? Here's where it gets really interesting for me. We've explored virtue through ancient Greek and Roman lenses, but the biggest question is, are these just Western ideals? Or did humans across time and cultures, entirely independently, arrive at similar conclusions about what makes a good person? Let's dive into that fascinating convergence.
You've hit on a critical point, and it's a question that a groundbreaking study in positive psychology, Shared Virtue, the convergence of valued human strengths across culture and history, directly addressed. The researchers undertook an ambitious historical survey examining ancient philosophical and religious traditions from across the globe to see if virtue catalogs would converge, if there was a universal pattern to human goodness.
How did they even approach that? It sounds huge.
It was huge. Their methodology was quite extensive and rigorous. They limited their search to traditions with enduring impact on human civilization. Confucianism and Taoism in China, Buddhism and Hinduism in South Asia, and Athenian philosophy, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam in the West. They focused on early, influential written texts that cataloged virtues, looking for both explicit lists and thematic representations. And their review revealed a surprising amount of similarity, identifying 6 broad core virtues that consistently recurred across these diverse traditions. While not a precise one-to-one mapping in every detail, these were broad family resemblances, common threads woven through the tapestry of human moral thought.
6 core virtues across such different traditions. That's quite a finding. What were they?
Okay, let's list them out. First, courage. Defined as emotional strengths involving the exercise of will to accomplish goals in the face of opposition, whether external or internal. This broadly includes bravery, perseverance, and authenticity or honesty. It's the strength to face fear and hardship.
Okay, courage.
Second, justice. These are the civic strengths that underpin healthy community life. Things like fairness, effective leadership, and good citizenship or teamwork. It's about treating others rightly and contributing to the common good.
Justice. Got it.
Third, humanity. Interpersonal strengths involving tending and befriending others, encompassing love, kindness, compassion, generosity. It's about how we connect with and care for our fellow humans.
Humanity makes sense.
Fourth, temperance. These are strengths that protect against excess, including forgiveness, humility, prudence, that practical wisdom in moderation and self-control. It's about balance and managing our impulses.
Temperance, babe.
Fifth, Wisdom, cognitive strengths that entail the acquisition and astute use of knowledge, manifested in things like creativity, curiosity, sound judgment, and perspective, which includes offering wise counsel to others. It's the intellectual capacity for understanding and discernment.
Wisdom, number 5.
And finally, sixth, transcendence. These are strengths that forge connections to the larger universe and thereby provide meaning, exemplified by gratitude, hope, and spirituality. It's about finding purpose beyond oneself, connecting to something larger.
Wow. Courage, justice, humanity, temperance, wisdom, transcendence. That's amazing they found those threads everywhere. How do they look in different cultures?
Yeah, it's truly fascinating to see how these core virtues were expressed with their unique cultural flavors. In Confucianism, Zhen, humanity, was exalted as the supreme virtue, with Yi, duty, justice, and Li, etiquette or proper conduct, emphasizing mutual respect and treating others sensitively. Z, wisdom, was the functional application of intellect to humanity, justice, and etiquette. Temperance was implied in modesty and self-control, and transcendence was seen in invoking heaven as the origin of virtue. For Taoism, its cardinal virtue was naturalness, zhujian, or spontaneity, with non-action, wuwei, as the method living in harmony with the flow of the universe. Other virtues like humanity, justice, and propriety were valued only if they arose from spontaneity, not rigid rules. Wisdom was the true insight of the way, and temperance was seen in humility and restraint. The Tao itself represented transcendence.
Very different emphasis there.
Very different. In Buddhism, the Holy Eightfold Path and 5 precepts emphasize principles closely aligned with humanity, justice, and temperance. Its 4 universal virtues included benevolence, compassion, joy, and equanimity. Its core tenets of non-duality and enlightenment make it forthrightly transcendent. Virtues were seen as tendencies to end a craving. Hinduism emphasized personal virtues like self-denial and duty, dharma. While often intertwined with notions of caste, core themes included wisdom, transcendental knowledge of Brahman, with transcendence diffused throughout its texts. Justice, courage, temperance, and humanity also made appearances, albeit with cultural specificities.
And back to the Greeks.
Moving to Athenian philosophy, Plato and Aristotle explicitly included the Platonic 4: courage, justice, temperance, and wisdom, which directly mirror the cross-cultural list. Aristotle added virtues like generosity, wit, truthfulness. While not explicitly named, transcendence suffused their works, Plato's ideal city modeling heavenly virtue, Aristotle linking happiness to divine wisdom, contemplation. Humanity was implied through discussions of friendship and charity. For Christian virtues, thinkers like Aquinas combined the 4 cardinal virtues with 3 theological virtues: faith, hope, and charity, love, with charity being supreme. This clearly incorporated the 6 core virtues. In Jewish virtues, the 10 Commandments implied justice, temperance, and transcendence. Proverbs offered sagely instructions on wisdom, justice, prudence, integrity, courage, love, humanity, diligence, temperance, hope, transcendence, and understanding, wisdom. And finally, Islamic virtues emphasize God and transcendence as central. Al-Farabi, influenced by Greek philosophy, focused on justice and virtue as the middle way, explicitly including virtues like wisdom, intellect, moderation, courage, liberality, humanity, and justice. Virtue itself was considered a spiritual act.
That's incredible. What did this study conclude from this overlap?
The study concludes that these ubiquitous virtues are corrective, meaning they counteract some inherent difficulty in the human condition, some temptation that needs to be resisted, or a motivation that needs to be rechanneled. They're what allow us to struggle against and to triumph over what is darkest within us, our impulses, our selfishness, our fears. This remarkable cross-cultural convergence provides a non-arbitrary, universally recognized basis for classifying positive traits, aligning with universal values and traits conducive to a good life, successful relationships, and excellence in the workplace. It suggests a shared human blueprint for flourishing.
This global convergence is compelling, highlighting a truly shared human understanding of what constitutes good character. It's almost like a universal moral grammar. But it leads to a very modern debate that surfaced in our sources. What's the actual difference between a value and a virtue, especially when we look at our own personal lives today? The terms often seem to be used interchangeably. This is a distinction that might seem subtle on the surface, but it generated a lot of thought-provoking discussion in our sources, especially in a modern psychological context like from ACT. What's the core difference between a value and a virtue?
Right. That Reddit discussion, drawing from acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, offers a clear and incredibly practical distinction that's really helpful for everyday life. From this perspective, a virtue is often perceived as a socioculturally defined value. It's a value that comes from a pre-existing, packaged belief system, maybe religion, maybe philosophy, maybe just societal norms. The implication is often clear. A good person should treat these virtues as their values. It carries a sense of transpersonal judgment, implying we're all measured against an objective external list. It's almost like a societal expectation.
Okay, so virtue is more external, maybe imposed.
In that ACT view, yes. In stark contrast, an ACT value is defined as a freely chosen quality of behavior. It's fundamentally about your personal preference, what you value intrinsically, not what society or others tell you necessarily. It's the deeply personal why of how you live, rather than the what you're told to do. Think of it with the lighthouse metaphor they use. Values are described as an underlying compass, constant amidst failure and pain, like a lighthouse providing direction regardless of sea conditions. No matter how stormy the seas, your lighthouse remains, showing you your true heading.
So values aren't goals to be achieved, but more like a continuous way of being, like that Stoic idea of a smoothly flowing life.
Exactly. Values aren't things we want that can be checked off a list, like getting married, which is a goal. Instead, a value is a continuous quality of behavior, such as being a loving partner. You don't achieve being a loving partner once and for all. You practice it daily. Values have constancy and allow us to engage with pain in service of what matters. For instance, enduring the pain of a challenging workout because you value health, or the vulnerability of opening up because you value connection. They have a for its own sake quality. The test is, if no one knew you had this value, would it still matter to you? If the answer is yes, it's likely a true value.
And they're about what you do want.
Crucially, yes, values are appetitive, meaning they are rooted in what we do want and what we are drawn towards, not in what we don't want or in avoidance. They help answer the question, when life is not governed by avoidance and control, when you're not just running away from discomfort, what can it truly be about? It's about leaning into what truly energizes and fulfills you.
How does this change how we view failure or wrongdoing?
Well, this also subtly changes how we view obstacles and negative behaviors. If virtues necessitate vices as their direct opposites, like honesty versus dishonesty, then values simply encounter things that get in the way. These obstacles don't have to be evil or inherent vices. They can be neutral things like lack of skill or fear or even lesser goods that simply compete for our attention or energy. This aligns with the Aristotelian idea of evil as a privation of good, a deficit, a lack in something meant to be good rather than an entity in itself. It's a more compassionate lens, perhaps, for viewing human imperfection.
That clarifies a lot. So if my actions don't match my stated values, is that simply hypocrisy or something else more complex?
The ACT perspective would suggest it's not necessarily hypocrisy, which is a pretty judgmental term implying intentional deceit. Instead, it's more likely a mistake. You might simply be incorrect about what your actual values are. If your actions consistently contradict your stated values, your actual values are probably different from what you articulate or consciously believe.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Like the example given, a priest might outwardly preach faith, but secretly, perhaps unconsciously, value the congregation's adoration and status more than his spiritual beliefs. He might not even consciously know his stated values differ from his real ones, or he might intentionally hide it. This internal dissonance can lead to deep suffering or a lack of vitality and genuine fulfillment.
What if you know your value but struggle to act on it?
That's another possibility. One might deeply value something like human connection, but due to past painful experiences like rejection or betrayal, avoid acting on that value to prevent future suffering. This avoidance then creates a different, often more chronic kind of suffering, or the source mentions the preoccupation with a hated object. If you spend all your time fighting against something, it often means it still holds a significant, albeit negative, place in your internal landscape, possibly masking an underlying value. And it's also important to note that values, while good, can become problematic if one becomes rigidly fixated on them, letting them dictate behavior to the point of self-neglect, like valuing selflessness to the extent of completely disregarding one's own needs and burning out. Value should be held gently, fostering flexible behavior that serves your life rather than becoming rigid rules that constrain it.
This leads to a fascinating point raised by our listener. How freely chosen our values if our circumstances like birth, nationality, or social class curtail our options? And why do some people seem so oblivious to their own values, unable to articulate them?
Those are crucial questions. The freely chosen aspect acknowledges that while our options are undeniably shaped by external circumstances, you can't choose to be a surgeon if you lack access to education, We still have agency within those constraints to choose how we live within our given reality, how we relate to our situation. There can be a sense of inevitability about one's values, where they feel like they've always been there, evolving organically from one's deepest self. It's maybe a discovery more than an invention for some.
And why might people not know their values?
As for why people might not know their values, the source offers several compelling reasons. First, systemic pressures like poverty, oppression, and trauma can leave people so focused on basic survival that they never have the space, the mental bandwidth, or the psychological safety to consider what truly matters to them beyond mere existence. Second, cultural conditioning, especially in Western culture's emphasis on eliminating problems as the path to happiness. The idea that if we just fix everything bad, we'll be happy, can prevent people from reflecting on deeper meaning, even in the presence of pain. We're often taught to avoid pain rather than engage with it in service of what matters. Third, people might be following unexamined beliefs or values they were taught without ever critically examining if those are their real values. They might mistakenly believe they're doing what is right or virtuous simply because they were told to, or because it's what everyone else does, rather than it genuinely resonating within them.
And values can change too, right?
Absolutely. And finally, life experience and change also play a huge role. Values can change or be reprioritized throughout life due to significant experiences. An abusive relationship might change one's value of love versus sanity and safety. Having children often shifts priorities. Losing a parent can prompt a reevaluation of life's true meaning. Sometimes it's not a change, but a discovery that helps one grow into a truer version of oneself. Ultimately, your values are what you value. They are not necessarily the average or most common values of a society. The challenge is often for individuals to become reflective enough to recognize their own intrinsic motivators, to find their own lighthouse.
This discussion brings us full circle to the intentional cultivation of these qualities, not just in our individual lives, but within educational systems, shaping not just moral character, but intellectual capabilities, especially in our complex digital age. How do we actually build virtue? It's clear that understanding virtues and values is crucial, but the big question remains, how do we actually develop these essential qualities, given they're not innate? Our sources highlight the profound role of education, broadly conceived, and even link it to critical thinking.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? How do we get there? A paper on educating for good character emphasizes that good character is not innate, but evolves over time through a steady process of teaching, learning, and modeling virtues in real-life situations. It's an intentional struggle to cultivate virtues, recognizing that it's a lifelong journey, not a destination you arrive at overnight. The central theoretical principle here is Aristotle's. Virtues are developed by accomplishing virtuous actions. You become courageous by acting courageously, just by acting justly.
Practice makes perfect, basically.
Pretty much. This process, which Aristotle called habituation, is just like learning any skill, really. Think about learning to play guitar or ride a bike. You don't just read about it, you do it repeatedly until it becomes second nature. It involves two main stages.
Okay, what are they?
The first stage is guidance, or learning that. Initially, we form true beliefs about what constitutes a virtuous act through explicit oral advice from parents or teachers, through rules or laws, or, crucially, through observing exemplars. Role models. A child, or even an adult at an early stage of ethical development, trusts the parent, teacher, or admired public figure regarding what is right. They learn the what. This is a lifelong project as we continually seek out role models.
So watching others is key.
Absolutely. The second stage is practice or action, which leads to understanding the why. As with other skills, a person only comes to truly understand why an action is right moving from merely knowing the that to understanding the why through action and repetition. This cognitive slant means ethical understanding deepens through practical engagement, through doing the right thing, even before fully grasping its inherent value. For example, a child might be told to share that's the that, but through repeated acts of sharing and seeing the positive outcome, they gradually understand why sharing is good and maybe even feel a genuine desire to do it.
That makes perfect sense. And this strong link between leadership, or being an exemplar, and character formation also extends to how we think and engage with information, right? Especially in our complex, digitally driven world. This brings us to the fascinating realm of intellectual virtues.
Precisely. Virtue epistemology, a relatively new field, puts intellectual virtues right at its center. It focuses not just on what we know, but on the characteristics and capabilities of a good thinker or a knowledgeable person. It emphasizes the knowing subject or agent. It asks, what kind of person is good at seeking and evaluating truth?
Interesting. Are there different kinds?
Within virtue epistemology, there are two main varieties mentioned. Virtue reliabilism, associated with Ernest Sosa, focuses on reliable cognitive abilities or faculty virtues, like good eyesight, reason, memory, things that help maximize truth over error. And then there's virtue responsibilism, linked to Lorraine Code and Linda Zagzebski, which emphasizes acquired cognitive character traits like intelligence, wisdom, prudence, open-mindedness. These are the virtues that can be cultivated through effort, just like moral virtues. For complete understanding, you probably need both types.
And this connects back to Aristotle again.
Definitely. The philosophical foundations of this contemporary character ethics are directly traced back to ancient Greece: Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Aristotle's view that moral virtues are character traits developed through habit and repeated activity directly informs this. Building on Aristotle's phronesis, practical wisdom, the concept of cyber wisdom, or cyberphronesis, has even emerged.
The cyberphonesis.
Yeah, it's the quality of knowing the acceptable course of action in any given online situation, knowing when to engage, when to disengage, how to verify information, how to communicate responsibly online. It's a kind of meta-virtue that harmonizes and requires the good application of other intellectual character virtues, like critical reasoning and open-mindedness in digital communication. It's basically about navigating the wild west of the internet with discernment and wisdom.
That's incredibly relevant for our modern age, especially with the sheer volume of information and misinformation online. So what are some of these key intellectual virtues we should be cultivating?
Good question. Within the responsibilist framework, the source highlights 9 foundational intellectual virtues. These are cognitive character traits aimed at honesty, truth, and minimizing errors. 1. Curiosity. An intrinsic motivation to ponder and learn new knowledge, specifically epistemic curiosity for intellectual engagement. Not just idle wondering, but a deep desire to understand how and why. This is a decisive factor in academic achievement and lifelong learning.
Curiosity, okay.
Intellectual humility, being aware of your own intellectual limitations and cognitive weaknesses, realistically admitting what you don't know. It contrasts with arrogance or pride. It's the willingness to say, I might be wrong, or I need to learn more.
Humility, crucial.
3. Intellectual autonomy. The ability to think and reason for yourself independently rather than simply accepting what you're told. This doesn't mean stubbornness. It involves balancing self-reliance with acknowledging when to depend on others or technology for reliable information. It's akin to thinking out of the box.
Thinking for yourself.
4. Attentiveness. Being intellectually attentive means focusing on details and nuances in cognitive tasks, not just skimming the surface. It's the ability to concentrate deeply on a problem or text.
Paying attention.
5. Intellectual carefulness. Sensitivity to avoiding intellectual faults and mistakes, striving for true beliefs and sound conclusions. This requires basic comprehension and critical thinking skills, taking the time to verify, to check your assumptions.
Being careful.
6. Intellectual thoroughness. Taking an interest in and seeking deep, comprehensive explanations for problems, dissatisfied with easy or shallow interpretations. This is crucial for judging the trustworthiness of sources and counteracting the digital superficiality that can come from constant, fast-paced digital media use.
Going deep.
7. Open-mindedness. The ability to genuinely consider other opinions and perspectives, leading to a willingness to change and correct your own beliefs and being aware of personal biases. It's crucial for genuine learning and avoiding those echo chambers we hear so much about.
Open-mindedness.
8. Intellectual courage. A readiness to face potential loss or harm, including fear, embarrassment, or social disapproval when communicating or presenting your views, especially unpopular truths. It's rooted in a love of epistemic goods, truth and understanding, and motivates the search for truth, even when it's uncomfortable.
Courage to speak truth.
9. Intellectual tenacity or perseverance. Embracing intellectual challenges and staying persistent, not giving up until epistemic goals have been achieved. It's the grit to keep digging for answers, even when they're difficult to find.
Stick-to-itiveness.
Exactly, and for each intellectual virtue, there's a corresponding vice, a weakness developed during intellectual life, like apathy, laziness, narrow-mindedness, or carelessness. Just as defective judgment can lead to a moral vice, it can lead to an intellectual vice, making us worse thinkers. There's a strong consensus that developing intellectual virtues is a valuable educational aim for any generation. An intellectually virtuous student has an intrinsic desire for love of learning, truthfulness, and understanding driven from within. While other educational aims, like simply acquiring knowledge and critical thinking skills, are important, some argue that the intellectual virtue aim should have priority because it fosters the disposition to use those skills well. The ideal is seen as the mutual overlapping of critical thinking and the fostering of intellectual virtues, creating intellectually virtuous critical thinkers, people who not only can think well, but want to and do think well consistently.
What an expansive journey, from ancient philosophies to modern psychology, and right into the heart of leadership and learning. So as we wrap up, what's the most crucial message for our listeners to carry forward from this deep dive?
We've truly taken a deep dive into the concept of virtue today, haven't we? We've explored it as an ancient blueprint for a well-lived life, a reliable pathway to happiness not dependent on external whims, and a critical component of effective, purposeful leadership in a constantly shifting world.
We've seen how virtues transcend cultures and histories, converging on core human strengths that act as corrective mechanisms against our deepest challenges and temptations. And we've wrestled with the nuances of distinguishing deeply personal values from culturally defined virtues, understanding the complex motivations behind our actions, and maybe where true fulfillment lies.
Perhaps the most compelling insight, for me anyway, is that cultivating good character, both moral and intellectual, isn't just an abstract ideal, a nice to have. It's a skill to be developed through consistent practice, guided by exemplars and rooted in a clear sense of purpose. It's our internal compass in a VUCA world, offering stability, meaning, and the capacity to overcome what sometimes feels like our darkest inclinations, to be truly, fully human.
And critically, the intentional cultivation of intellectual virtues is paramount for navigating our complex information landscape. Fostering minds that seek truth with genuine curiosity, are humble in their limitations, courageous in their pursuit of understanding, and thorough in their inquiry. It shapes not just what you know, but how you know, and how you engage with the world's information.
So, what does this all mean for you listening right now? If virtue is indeed, as the Stoics claimed, the only good that offers a reliable and consistent basis for happiness, an internal fortress no external force can breach, and if it's something cultivated through intentional, repeated action, then consider this. What single virtue, whether moral like justice or self-control or intellectual like curiosity or intellectual courage, will you commit to nurturing even just a little bit in your own life this week? And how might that small, intentional act begin to reshape your entire experience, just as it did for Marcus Aurelius, or the many individuals and leaders whose lives are illuminated by these ancient insights?
In a world that often measures success by external metrics and fleeting pleasures, perhaps the most profound and genuinely empowering act you can undertake is the lifelong, quiet pursuit of inner excellence of virtue itself. What might your life look like if you truly embrace that challenge, not as a burden, but as the ultimate journey of self-mastery and flourishing?
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into what truly makes a life well lived.